Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of history's darkest chapters, when living alone as a woman was a death sentence. For centuries across Europe, independent women were hunted as witches and burned alive, not for practicing evil, but for refusing to live under male control. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Think about your life right now. According to modern reality, you can live alone without anyone questioning your morality or sanity. You can be unmarried, childless, and independent without facing accusations of supernatural evil. But according to historical reality spanning roughly 1400 to 1800, a woman living alone was viewed with deep suspicion, fear, and often outright hostility. The reasoning, according to contemporary beliefs, was simple and deadly. A woman without male supervision must be controlled by the devil instead. Tonight, according to what I am going to show you, we'll journey into the world where female independence was evidence of demonic possession. You'll discover exactly why living alone made you a target, how economic independence threatened the social order, what happened to women who owned property without husbands, and the brutal consequences thousands of women faced for the crime of being self-sufficient. We'll explore the witch hunts that specifically targeted solitary women, the legal systems that made independence itself suspicious, the communities that turned on their unmarried neighbours, and the rare women who survived despite being alone. This isn't just about historical superstition, according to modern historians and gender scholars. It is about understanding how patriarchal societies use fear and supernatural accusations to control women who step outside prescribed roles. According to what we'll see, the echoes of this persecution persist in modern stigma against single women, ongoing debates about women's independence, and the ways female autonomy continues to be pathologized. Let's start with the fundamental question. Why was a woman living alone so threatening? According to medieval and early modern European social structure, women were expected to exist under male authority their entire lives. You were, according to the system, under your father's authority until marriage, then your husband's authority, and if widowed, ideally your adult son's authority or male relative's supervision. A woman existing outside this structure, according to contemporary thinking, was unnatural and dangerous. Meet Agnes, a 45-year-old woman living in a small English village in 1612. According to your situation, you've never married. Your parents, according to your history, died when you were in your early 30s, leaving you their small cottage and a bit of land. You support yourself, according to your work, through spinning wool, growing vegetables in your garden, and occasionally helping deliver babies in the village. You live, according to the simple fact, alone. This living arrangement, according to village perception, is deeply suspicious. Your neighbours, according to their questions, wonder why you never married. Some speculate, according to gossip, that you must be barren or deformed in some hidden way. Others suggest, according to darker rumours, that you refused marriage because you preferred unnatural independence. The fact that you support yourself according to the interpretation proves you don't need a man, and a woman who doesn't need a man, according to the logic, must get her power from somewhere else. Somewhere dark. You've noticed, according to your growing awareness, that people treat you differently than they treat married women or widows living with family. When you walk through the village, according to the reactions, some people make the sign of the cross. Mothers, according to their protective instincts, pull their children away from you. Men, according to their suspicion, avoid speaking to you directly. You are becoming, according to the social process, the village outsider, the strange woman who lives alone, and in a world that believes the devil walks among us. According to the danger, being strange and alone makes you a prime suspect for witchcraft. According to historian Brian Levac's extensive research on European witch trials, Unmarried women living alone made up a disproportionate percentage of those accused of witchcraft. The correlation, according to statistical analysis of trial records, is striking. In many regions, according to the data, between 60 to 80% of accused witches were women, and among those women, according to further breakdown, unmarried or widowed women living independently were vastly overrepresented compared to their percentage of the population. The reasons, according to historical analysis, were multiple and interconnected. First, according to economic factors, a woman supporting herself without a man challenged the fundamental structure of how property and labour were supposed to work. Second, according to social factors, she had no male protector to defend her against accusations. Third, according to theological factors, she was seen as spiritually vulnerable to the devil's temptations without a husband's guidance. Fourth, according to practical factors, she was often poor and marginalized, making her an easy scapegoat when misfortune struck the community. Meet Marjorie, living in a German town in 1628. According to your circumstances, you are a widow in your 50s. Your husband, according to his death, died 5 years ago, leaving you a small house and his shoemaking tools. You've learned, according to your survival, to make shoes yourself, to support yourself. You live, according to necessity, alone because you have no children and your husband's relatives didn't offer you a place in their homes. Your skill at shoemaking, according to community reaction, makes some people uncomfortable. Shoemaking, according to gender norms, is man's work. That you can do it, according to suspicious thinking, suggests unnatural knowledge. Where did you learn, according to the questions, to work leather so well? Your husband never taught you while he lived, according to what neighbours remember. So how, according to the insinuation, did you acquire this skill so quickly after his death? The devil, according to the whispers, must have taught you in exchange for your soul. When a wealthy merchant's child dies of fever, according to the tragedy that follows, someone remembers that you walked past their house the day before the child fell ill. Your gaze, according to the reinterpretation of a normal glance, must have carried the evil eye. You are arrested, according to the accusation, for witchcraft. Your living alone, according to the evidence presented against you, is cited as proof of your unnatural character. A godly woman, according to the prosecutor's argument, would have remarried or joined a convent or lived with relatives. Your choice to live independently and practice a man's trade, according to the logic, proves you've rejected God's order and embraced Satan's. According to the trial records analysed by historian Robin Briggs, the accusation of living alone or living suspiciously appears again and again in witch trial documentation. The phrase, "she lives alone," or "she keeps to herself," or "she has no master," according to their frequency in records, were treated as significant evidence of guilt. The very fact of female independence, according to legal reasoning, was suspicious enough to warrant investigation. Now let's examine the economic dimension of why independent women were so threatening. According to the feudal and early capitalist economic systems, property and productive resources were meant to be controlled by men. A woman who owned property, earned income, or controlled resources without male oversight, according to the threat she posed, disrupted this entire system. Meet Isobel, a Scottish widow living in Edinburgh in 1590. According to your situation, your husband was a successful merchant who died suddenly, leaving you his business, his shop, and considerable inventory. You've continued, according to your capability, running the business successfully for 3 years. You trade, according to your work, in cloth and household goods. You employ, according to your operation, 2 male apprentices and a serving girl. You own, according to your wealth, your shop building and a house above it. Your success, according to the reactions, breeds resentment. Other merchants, according to their complaints, don't like competing with a woman. They argue, according to their position, that you must be cheating somehow, because women aren't capable of running businesses honestly. When you make a profitable deal, according to the interpretation, it is because you've used supernatural means to deceive the other party. When your shop does better than a competitor's, according to the suspicion, it is because you've cursed their business. The Merchants Guild, according to their pressure, petitions to have your business license revoked on the grounds that a woman shouldn't hold such a position. When that fails, according to the escalation, rumours about witchcraft start circulating. It is said, according to the gossip, that you are seen talking to yourself in the shop, obviously conversing with demons. Your cat, according to the reframing of normal pet ownership, must be your familiar spirit. The herbs you keep, according to suspicious interpretation, for cooking and household use are now said to be ingredients for evil potions. According to economic historian Mary Wiesner, Hanks's research, women who controlled significant property or ran successful businesses faced particular scrutiny and hostility. The combination of being female, being economically independent, and being successful, according to the analysis, was seen as so unnatural that supernatural explanation seemed logical to contemporaries. How else, according to the reasoning, could a mere woman, supposedly inferior in intellect and capability, succeed in business unless she had demonic help? Think about what this meant in practice. According to the trap, if you were poor and living alone, you were suspected of witchcraft because you must be getting resources from the devil. If you were prosperous and living alone, according to the other side of the trap, you were suspected of witchcraft because you couldn't have earned that prosperity through natural means. Female poverty, according to the interpretation, suggested supernatural sustenance. Female prosperity, according to the opposite interpretation, suggested supernatural assistance. Either way, according to the impossible situation, you were damned. Meet Anne Bodenham, an English woman executed for witchcraft in 1653. According to historical records, she was a cunning woman who lived alone and supported herself by telling fortunes, finding lost objects, and providing folk remedies. She had, according to contemporary accounts, no husband or family. She owned, according to her possessions, her own small cottage. She was, according to witnesses, literate and owned several books, extraordinary for a woman of her class. Her literacy, according to the evidence used against her, was particularly damning. A poor woman who could read according to the logic must have been taught by the devil, since she couldn't have afforded education. The books she owned, according to examination, were actually medical and herbal texts, but they were interpreted, according to the prosecution, as grimoires of black magic. Her ability to support herself through her services, according to the argument, proved she had unnatural powers. The fact that she lived alone and had done so for years, according to the final evidence, showed she had rejected godly society for demonic companionship. She was hanged, according to her execution, as a witch. Her property, according to the aftermath, was confiscated. Her books, according to the disposal, were burned. The records of her trial, according to historian Diane Purkis's analysis, show clearly that her independence and self-sufficiency were central to the case against her. She was dangerous, according to the core accusation, not because of any specific harm she'd caused, but because she existed outside male control. According to broader patterns in witch trial records, women who practiced healing, midwifery, or folk medicine while living alone faced especially high risk of accusation. These women, according to their social position, had knowledge, skill, and community respect that gave them power. That power, according to patriarchal interpretation, must come from somewhere illegitimate because women weren't supposed to have independent authority. Now let's explore the sexual dimension of suspicion towards solitary women. According to medieval and early modern moral theology, female sexuality was considered dangerous and in need of constant control. A woman without a husband, according to the reasoning, was sexually uncontrolled and therefore vulnerable to the devil's sexual advances or temptations toward unnatural acts. Meet Fronoise, living in a French village in 1670. According to your situation, you are 30 years old and have never married. You live, according to the arrangement, in a small cottage you inherited from your grandmother. You support yourself according to your work through embroidery and lace making. You attend church according to your piety regularly. You cause according to objective assessment. No trouble to anyone, but according to community perception, there is something wrong with you. Why, according to the questions everyone asks, haven't you married? You are not deformed, according to observation. You are not desperately poor, according to your cottage and skill. So why, according to the persistence of the question, would you choose to remain alone? The answer, according to speculation, must be that you are engaging in sexual sin that makes you unfit for marriage. Some say, according to rumours, that you must be meeting with the devil at night for carnal relations. The devil's sexual appetite, according to theological texts and popular belief, is insatiable, and he particularly targets unmarried women. Others suggest, according to darker whispers, that you engage in unnatural acts with other women or even with animals. How else, according to the reasoning, to explain why you don't want a husband? Your embroidery, according to reinterpretation, becomes suspect. The patterns you create, according to those looking for evil, might contain hidden symbols of devil worship. The fact that you often work late into the night by candlelight, according to suspicious observers, suggests you are conducting rituals under cover of legitimate work. Your regular church attendance, according to the interpretation, might be a facade to hide your true allegiance to Satan. According to historian Lyndall Roper's analysis of German witch trials, sexual accusations were central to many cases against unmarried women. The idea that the devil had sexual relations with witches, according to demonological theory, was widely accepted. At trial, according to common practice, women were often asked in graphic detail about their alleged sexual encounters with Satan. The assumption, according to the theological framework, was that a woman living alone must be getting her sexual satisfaction from somewhere, and if not from a legitimate husband, then it must be from an illegitimate supernatural source. Meet the records of the North Berwick witch trials in Scotland, 1590 to 1592. According to these documented cases, many of the accused women were unmarried or widowed women living alone. The interrogations, according to the surviving records, included extensive questioning about sexual acts with the devil. Women were asked, according to the questions, how many times they'd had sex with Satan, what form he took, whether the sex was painful or pleasurable, and whether they'd had children by him. These questions, according to their function, served multiple purposes. First, according to the practical effect, they humiliated and traumatized the accused women. Second, according to the legal purpose, they established that the women had entered into a sexual pact with Satan, which was evidence of witchcraft. Third, according to the social function, they reinforced the idea that unmarried female sexuality was inherently dangerous and demonic. The message, according to what was being communicated, was clear. A woman's sexuality must be contained within marriage, or it will turn to evil. Think about the impossible position this created. According to the expectation, you were supposed to marry, but according to economic reality, not all women could find husbands or afford to marry. According to biological reality, not all women wanted to marry or could have children, but according to the social interpretation, choosing not to marry or being unable to marry meant something was fundamentally wrong with you. And that wrongness, according to the religious framework, must be spiritual corruption. Now let's examine how age intersected with solitary living to create particular vulnerability. According to demographic patterns in witch accusations, older women living alone faced especially high risk. The combination of being female, being old, being unmarried or widowed, and living independently, according to the data, created maximum suspicion. Meet Alce Young, the first person executed for witchcraft in the American colonies, hanged in Connecticut in 1647. According to the limited records that survive, she was likely a middle-aged woman. She may have been, according to speculation, based on typical patterns, a widow or unmarried woman living alone. The exact accusations against her, according to historical gaps, aren't fully recorded, but according to the fact of her execution and the patterns visible in similar cases, her status as a solitary woman likely played a central role. According to historian Carol Carlson's research on New England witch trials, women over 40 who lived alone or with only other women faced dramatically elevated risk of accusation. These women, according to the analysis, often had some property, perhaps a house or small plot of land inherited from parents or a deceased husband. They had, according to their survival, proven they could live without men, and they were, according to age-related factors, past childbearing, and therefore not fulfilling the primary function assigned to women. The post-menopausal woman living alone, according to popular belief, was particularly suspect. She no longer had, according to her biological state, the monthly purging of menstruation that was thought to cleanse women's bodies of corrupt humours. This retention, according to medical theory of the time, meant old women's bodies became increasingly toxic and corrupt. The corruption, according to the logic, made them susceptible to the devil and gave them power to harm through their very presence or gaze. Meet the stereotype of the witch as depicted in art and literature from the period. According to these representations, witches were typically portrayed as old, ugly, solitary women, often with cats or other animals. This image, according to cultural historians, reflected and reinforced the real-world targeting of elderly women living alone. The artistic depictions, according to their function, made it seem natural and obvious that such women would be witches. The association, according to its circulation, became so strong that simply being an old woman living alone made you look like the cultural image of a witch. According to trial records from various regions, accusations often followed a similar pattern. An old woman living alone would have some conflict with neighbours, perhaps a property dispute, or someone refused her request for food or assistance, or she complained about children trespassing. Shortly after, according to the sequence of events, some misfortune would strike the person who'd had conflict with her. A cow would die, a child would sicken, crops would fail, beer would spoil. The old woman's anger or curse, according to the interpretation, must have caused the harm. Meet Ursula Kemp, executed for witchcraft in England in 1582. According to trial records, she was an older woman who lived alone and supported herself as a healer and midwife. When she fell out with a neighbour over payment for her services, according to the sequence, the neighbour's children fell ill. Kemp was accused, according to the charge, of cursing the children through witchcraft. At trial, according to testimony, her living alone was mentioned as evidence of her suspicious character. She was hanged, according to the sentence, along with several other solitary women accused at the same time. The targeting of old women living alone, according to historical analysis, served several social functions. It removed, according to one effect, women who might be burdens on communities' limited charitable resources. It freed up, according to another effect, the small properties these women might own for male relatives to claim. It reinforced, according to the ideological effect, the message that women who didn't remain under male control throughout their lives would come to bad ends, and it provided, according to the psychological function, convenient scapegoats when communities needed to explain misfortune. Meet Gillis Dun Canny, tried for witchcraft in Scotland in 1590 as part of the North Berwick witch trials. According to the records, she was an elderly woman living alone in a small cottage on the outskirts of town. She supported herself, according to her work, through spinning and occasional midwifery. Her neighbours, according to their testimony, had known her for decades without incident. But according to the climate of fear that swept Scotland in 1590, decades of peaceful coexistence meant nothing once suspicion turned against you. The accusations against Gillis, according to the trial documents, began when a merchant's wife gave birth to a stillborn child. The merchant's wife, according to her statement, claimed that Gillis had attended her during labour and must have cursed the baby. Never mind, according to the ignored facts, that Gillis had successfully delivered dozens of healthy babies over the years. Never mind, according to the medical reality, that stillbirths were tragically common and usually had natural causes. Once one person accused according to the pattern, others came forward with their own suspicions. A farmer, according to his testimony, said his cow had stopped giving milk after Gillis walked past his field. A young woman, according to her claim, said she'd felt a strange pain in her side after Gillis looked at her in church. An older man, according to his accusation, said his crops had failed the year after he'd refused to give Gillis some vegetables from his garden. The refusal, according to the interpretation, had angered the witch, and she'd cursed his land in revenge. None of these claims, according to modern analysis, had any real evidence, but according to the logic of witch trials, a pattern of misfortune following interactions with the accused woman was considered proof of maleficium, harmful magic. Gillis's solitary living, according to the prosecution, explained how she'd acquired these evil powers. Living alone, according to the argument, she'd had ample opportunity to meet with the devil in secret, to learn his dark arts, to make her pact with him. During interrogation, according to the procedure, Gillis was subjected to sleep deprivation. She was kept awake, according to the method, for days on end. Guards watched her constantly, according to the practice, preventing her from closing her eyes. The theory, according to demonological belief, was that if you kept a witch from sleeping, she couldn't renew her strength from her demonic familiar. Eventually, according to the expected outcome, the exhaustion would break her will and she would confess. Gillis, according to the tragic result, did eventually confess. After 5 days without sleep, according to her state, she was hallucinating and barely coherent. She confessed according to what they wanted to hear, to meeting the devil at midnight, to flying through the air to Sabbaths, to cursing her neighbours' crops and cattle. She named, according to the pressure to implicate others, 3 other women who she said had been at the Sabbaths with her, women who were themselves elderly and living alone or with minimal family. She was convicted according to the verdict and strangled before being burned. The strangulation, according to the mercy, was considered a kindness. She would be dead before the flames touched her body. Her cottage, according to the aftermath, was torn down. Her few possessions, according to the disposal, were burned as contaminated by evil. The other women she'd named, according to the chain of accusations, were arrested and tried in turn. According to the broader pattern visible in Gillis's case, solitary elderly women faced a particularly vicious cycle of vulnerability. They had, according to their age, outlived many of their protectors. They had, according to their poverty, few resources to defend themselves. They had, according to their roles as healers or midwives, been present at moments of crisis when things sometimes went wrong despite their best efforts. And they had, according to their gender and living situation, no social power to resist when communities decided they needed a scapegoat. The idea of the evil eye, according to the superstition, was particularly damaging to elderly women. According to folk belief widespread across Europe, some people could curse others merely by looking at them with envy or malice. The evil eye, according to the signs, was supposedly more powerful in people who were envious, bitter, or corrupted by dark forces. An old woman living alone, according to the stereotype, was presumed to be envious of others' families, bitter about her own isolation, and possibly corrupted by demonic influence. Therefore, according to the logic, her gaze itself was dangerous. Meet Annelien Hertzfelder, tried in Germany in 1627. According to her case, she was a widow in her 70s who lived alone in a small house. Her late husband had left her. She was, according to community perception, somewhat argumentative and unpleasant. When a neighbour's child died after Annelien had quarrelled with the child's mother, according to the accusation, Annelien's angry look during the quarrel was said to have carried the evil eye that killed the child. The idea that her mere gaze could kill, according to the prosecution's theory, was based on her status as a solitary woman. A woman living under proper male authority, according to the reasoning, would not develop such concentrated malice. But a woman living alone, according to the belief, fermented in her own bitterness until it became toxic and deadly. Her living arrangement, according to the evidence, proved she had the character capable of murder by evil eye. Emmeline was convicted according to the outcome, largely on the basis of her having looked angry during an argument, something virtually everyone does at some point. She was executed, according to the sentence, by burning. Her house, according to the property transfer, was given to male relatives who had not spoken to her in years but were happy to claim her property once she was condemned. According to the function of these executions, the message to other solitary elderly women was clear: keep your eyes down, control your expressions, never show anger or any strong emotion, accept insults and injuries without reaction, because your independence, according to the threat, meant that any display of normal human emotion could be reinterpreted as witchcraft and get you killed. Now let's explore the specific vulnerability of widows, because according to the social position, widowhood could be particularly dangerous if not managed correctly. A widow, according to her status, was a woman who had been under male authority, but was now free of it. How she navigated this freedom, according to social expectations, determined whether she remained respectable or became suspect. Meet Catherine, a widow in an English market town in 1650. According to your situation, your husband died 2 years ago, leaving you with a house, a small shop, and some debts. You have, according to your family, 3 young children to support. You've taken over, according to necessity, running your late husband's shop selling household goods. You live, according to the arrangement, in the rooms above the shop with your children. Your situation, according to community assessment, is borderline acceptable. You are living without a man, according to the fact, but you have children with you, which provides some supervision and makes your household less irregular. You are running a business, according to the unusual aspect, but it was your husband's business, so there is some legitimacy to your doing so. You are economically independent, according to the concerning factor, but you can claim necessity because of your children's needs. However, according to the precariousness of your position, you must be very careful. You attend church, according to your visible piety, faithfully every Sunday, and sit in the section for respectable widows. You dress, according to the rules, in somber widow's clothing, without any fashionable touches that might suggest you are trying to attract a new husband, which would be unseemly, or that you are enjoying your freedom, which would be suspicious. You are friendly with neighbours, according to your social performance, but not too friendly, not so much that it seems you are trying to compensate for lack of a husband with excessive socializing. You know, according to your awareness, that some in the community are watching for you to make a mistake. If you are too successful in business, according to the interpretation, it might suggest unnatural help. If you are too poor, according to the opposite danger, you might become a burden and attract resentment. If you remain unmarried too long, according to the suspicion, people will wonder why. If you remarry too quickly, according to the judgment, you'll be condemned for not mourning properly. The window, according to the acceptable range of proper widow behaviour, is narrow. According to historian Amy Freud's research on single women in early modern England, widows who remarried relatively quickly and returned to male supervision were generally safe from serious suspicion, but widows who remained unmarried for extended periods, especially if they had property or ran businesses, according to the risk factors, faced increasing scrutiny. The longer you remained independent, according to the pattern, the more likely people were to see your independence as a choice rather than a temporary necessity, and choice, according to the problem, suggested unnatural desires. Meet Alice Samuel, executed for witchcraft in England in 1593. According to the case records, she was a widow living with her daughter and son-in-law. Even though she wasn't technically living alone, according to the nuance, the fact that she was a widow with somewhat independent status within the household made her vulnerable. When the children of a wealthy local family began having fits, according to the accusation, Alice was blamed. Her status as a widow, according to the evidence presented, was part of the case against her. A proper widow, according to the implication, would be so overcome with grief and so focused on prayer that she wouldn't have the energy or inclination for witchcraft. So the fact that she seemed to be managing her life competently was actually suspicious. The contradiction, according to its impossible nature, trapped widows in a catch-22, be too grief-stricken and incapable, according to one danger, and you'd be a burden that might attract resentment. Be too competent and independent, according to the other danger, and you'd be suspicious for not being properly broken by your widowhood. The correct performance, according to the requirement, was to be sad but functional, dependent but not too much of a burden, pious but not fanatical, social but not too friendly. The margins for error, according to the difficulty, were tiny. According to inheritance laws in many jurisdictions, widows had some rights to their late husband's property, typically a third or a half as dower rights. This property, according to its status, was supposed to support the widow for her lifetime, but would revert to her husband's heirs at her death. Male relatives, according to their interests, sometimes had incentive to see a widow die or remarry so they could gain full control of the property. An accusation of witchcraft, according to its utility, could achieve both goals. Either the widow would be executed and the property freed, or she'd be so frightened she'd remarry quickly to gain a male protector. Now let's examine how certain occupations made solitary women particularly suspect. According to social analysis, women who lived alone and worked in occupations that gave them special knowledge or power faced maximum danger. Healers, midwives, herbalists, wise women, these roles, according to their nature, required knowledge that seemed mysterious to outsiders. Meet Isabel Gowdy, a Scottish woman whose detailed confessions of witchcraft in 1662 became famous. According to her testimony, which was likely extracted through torture or psychological pressure, she described attending Sabbaths, flying through the air, and shape-shifting into animals. She was, according to records, a married woman, but her husband was apparently absent or unimportant to the case. She lived, according to her semi-independent status, effectively alone in practical terms. She was known, according to community knowledge, for healing skills and knowledge of herbs. Her knowledge, according to the interpretation, was reframed as witchcraft. The herbs she used for healing, according to the accusation, were ingredients for curses. The muttering she did while mixing remedies, probably traditional healing charms or prayers according to the evidence, were spells calling on demons. Her success in healing some patients, according to the logic, proved she had supernatural power. Her failure to save others, according to the opposite reasoning, showed she was using her power for evil. According to historian Emma Wilby's research on Scottish witch beliefs, many accused witches were women who practiced traditional healing and magic. These women, according to their role, existed in a liminal space. They had special knowledge and skills that gave them status and made them useful to communities. But that same knowledge made them potentially dangerous if relationships with neighbours soured. A healer who was valued when she cured your child, according to the shift, could become a witch who cursed your cow if you later had a dispute with her. Meet Mother Shipton, a legendary English witch and prophet said to have lived in the early 1500s. According to the legends, she was born to a teenage mother who was suspected of witchcraft, grew up ugly and deformed, and lived alone in a cave. She made, according to the stories, prophecies that came true and had knowledge of future events. She was, according to the characterization, a solitary woman with supernatural knowledge. Whether Mother Shipton actually existed, according to historical debate, is unclear, but according to the cultural function of her legend, she represents the archetype of the solitary wise woman who has knowledge and power that men don't understand. She is frightening, according to the portrayal, but also sometimes useful. People come to her according to the stories for prophecies and help, but they also fear and shun her. Her solitary existence, according to the narrative logic, is both cause and consequence of her power. She lives alone because her knowledge makes her different and frightening. The wise woman, cunning woman, or white witch who lived alone, according to historical reality, walked a dangerous line. If things went well, according to the positive scenario, she might be tolerated or even valued for her services. But if anything went wrong, according to the danger, she was an obvious scapegoat. Her living alone, according to the vulnerability, meant she had no family to defend her. Her knowledge, according to the evidence against her, could easily be reinterpreted as evil rather than helpful. According to trial records, accusations against healers and wise women often came after they'd refused someone's request for help or after a patient died despite treatment. The refusal, according to the interpretation, showed she was reserving her power for evil purposes. The death, according to the logic, showed she'd either failed to use her power or had actively caused harm. Either way, according to the suspicion, her power was illegitimate and probably demonic. Think about the impossible situation these women faced. According to their knowledge and skill, they filled important roles in communities, delivering babies, treating illness, finding lost objects, offering advice. But according to the same knowledge and skill, they were vulnerable to accusations if anything went wrong or if they offended someone. The very thing, according to the paradox, that made them valuable also made them dangerous to themselves. Now let's explore one of the most damaging pieces of evidence used against solitary women, their relationships with animals. According to witch trial theology, witches were said to have familiar spirits, demons in animal form who assisted them in their evil work. And according to the cruel logic of persecution, a solitary woman with a cat, dog, bird, or any other pet could see that innocent companionship transformed into proof of demonic alliance. Meet Elizabeth Francis, tried for witchcraft in England in 1566. According to the trial records, she was an unmarried woman living alone who owned a white-spotted cat named Satan. The cat, according to her testimony extracted under duress, was actually a demonic familiar given to her by her grandmother, also accused of witchcraft. The cat, according to the confession, could speak and had promised her various favours in exchange for drops of her blood. The reality, according to modern analysis, was almost certainly far more mundane. Elizabeth was a solitary woman who kept a cat for companionship and pest control, standard practice in an era when homes were overrun with mice and rats. The cat, according to biological fact, could not speak and was not demonic. But, according to the interpretation imposed on her life, everything about her relationship with the animal was reframed as sinister. Did she talk to the cat? According to the questions, of course she did. People living alone often talk to their pets for companionship, but according to the witch trial framework, talking to an animal proved you were conversing with a demon. Did the cat sleep on her bed, according to the observations? Naturally, cats seek warmth. But according to the accusation, this proved the familiar was renewing its power from the witch's body at night. Did she feed the cat well, according to neighbours who'd noticed? Obviously, she cared for her pet, but according to the theory, she was feeding it with her own blood in payment for evil services. Elizabeth was convicted according to the verdict and executed. The cat, according to the disposal, was killed as well. Her small cottage, according to the aftermath, was searched and her few possessions examined for any other signs of witchcraft. A collection of dried herbs, according to the evidence, was labelled as ingredients for evil potions. A strange stone she'd found and kept, because she found it pretty, according to the interpretation, was declared to be a charm given by the devil. According to historian Lyndall Ruper's research on German witch trials, animals as familiars appear in huge numbers of cases, and the women who owned these supposed familiars were disproportionately solitary women living alone. The pattern, according to analysis, makes perfect sense. Women living alone were more likely to keep pets for companionship, protection, and pest control. They had no human household members to provide company, so they bonded with animals. But this normal, practical companionship, according to the witch trial framework, became evidence of supernatural evil. Meet Isabel Grierson, tried in Scotland in 1607. According to the records, she was a widow living alone who was accused of having multiple familiar spirits in the forms of a dog, a cat, and a toad. The dog, according to her normal life, was probably for protection. A woman living alone needed protection from thieves and attackers. The cat, according to reality, was for mice and companionship. The toad, according to the most likely explanation, simply lived in her garden, as toads do. But according to the accusations, each animal was a demon in disguise. The dog's barking when strangers approached, according to the reinterpretation, was the familiar warning her of visitors, so she could prepare her evil magic. The cat's nighttime wandering, according to suspicious neighbours, showed it was off doing the witch's malicious bidding. The toad in the garden, according to folk belief about toads being especially associated with witches, proved she was brewing poisons. Isabel tried to explain, according to her defence, that these were just normal animals. But according to the prosecution, the very fact that she had multiple animals proved she was powerful in witchcraft, requiring several demonic assistants. She was convicted according to the trial outcome and executed. Her animals, according to the sentence, were killed alongside her. The familiar spirit belief, according to its function, was particularly damaging to solitary women because it criminalized one of their few sources of comfort. According to the loneliness of their position, women living alone naturally sought companionship wherever they could find it. Animals, according to their availability, were often the only companions possible. They didn't judge, didn't gossip, didn't condemn a woman for living outside social norms. But this innocent comfort, according to the persecution, became one more piece of evidence against them. According to trial records, examiners would search accused women's bodies for the witch's mark, a supposedly insensitive spot where the familiar spirit would suckle blood from the witch's body. According to the procedure, women were stripped naked and their bodies examined by groups of appointed women who would prick their skin with pins, searching for these insensitive spots. Any mole, scar, birthmark, or naturally less sensitive area, according to the findings, could be declared a witch's mark. For solitary women, according to the added humiliation, this invasive examination was done without family members present to protect their dignity or challenge the examiner's findings. They stood alone, according to their vulnerability, naked before hostile examiners looking for any excuse to confirm their guilt. And according to the certainty of the outcome, the examiners always found what they were looking for. Meet Janet Horne, the last person executed for witchcraft in the British Isles, killed in Scotland in 1727. According to the records, she was an elderly woman who lived with her daughter, but was otherwise isolated from the community. Her daughter, according to descriptions, had a deformity of her hands and feet. Janet, according to the accusation, had supposedly transformed her daughter into a pony and had her shod by the devil, which explained the deformities. The reality, according to modern understanding, was that her daughter likely had a congenital condition or the result of childhood illness or injury. But, according to the witch trial logic, any abnormality connected to a solitary or marginal woman must have a supernatural cause. Janet's age, her poverty, her isolation, and her disabled daughter, according to all the risk factors, made her the perfect target. She was burned, according to her execution, in a tar barrel. Her daughter's fate, according to the gaps in records, is unknown. The use of children's testimony against accused women, according to another devastating pattern, was particularly effective and cruel. Children, according to the belief, were innocent, and therefore their testimony was considered especially truthful. But according to the reality, children could be coached, frightened, or simply mistaken. And according to the pattern in many trials, children's testimony was often used to condemn solitary women. Meet the children of Salem in 1692. According to the famous witch trials, much of the testimony came from young girls who claimed to be tormented by the spectres of accused witches. These girls, according to their testimony, said they saw the spectral forms of various women pinching them, choking them, and trying to force them to sign the devil's book. Many of the accused, according to analysis of the cases, were women living alone or in marginal positions. Sarah Good, according to her circumstances, was a homeless beggar who sometimes had to sleep outdoors or beg for shelter. She was, according to her poverty, utterly dependent on the charity of others, with no home of her own. When she begged and was refused, according to some accounts, she would mutter under her breath as she walked away. This muttering, according to the interpretation, was suspected to be curses. The children of Salem, according to their testimony, claimed Sarah Good's spectre tormented them. Sarah, according to her defense, denied the accusations and pointed out that she'd never harmed the children. But, according to the spectral evidence accepted by the court, the children's visions of her spectre were taken as proof of her witchcraft. The fact that she lived in abject poverty with no home or protection, according to additional suspicion, suggested she must be getting help from the devil. How else could she survive? Sarah was hanged according to her execution in July 1692. She was pregnant at the time of her trial, according to the tragedy, and gave birth in prison to a baby who died. Her final words from the scaffold, according to witnesses, were to declare her innocence and to predict that her accusers would face divine punishment for the innocent blood they were shedding. Now let's explore how property ownership by solitary women became particularly threatening. According to property law and custom, land and substantial property were meant to pass through male lines. A woman who owned property outright, according to the disruption, broke this pattern and could cause problems for inheritance and property transfer. Meet Joan Waterhouse, executed for witchcraft in England in 1566. According to trial records, she was an older woman who lived alone and owned her cottage and a small piece of land. When she died, according to the legal expectation, her property should pass to male relatives. But according to her will, she left her property to a female friend who had helped care for her in her final years. This decision, according to reactions, outraged her male relatives. The trial, according to its timing, happened before her death, brought by neighbours who accused her of witchcraft. The accusations, according to their content, included cursing cattle and causing illness. But according to historical analysis, the timing suggests the male relatives who stood to inherit may have encouraged or supported the accusations to prevent Joan from making her unconventional will. If she were executed as a witch, according to the legal consequence, her property would be forfeited and would likely end up with male kin rather than her chosen female heir. According to historian Elspeth Whitney's research on property and witch accusations, disputes over property, inheritance, and land use appear frequently in the background of witchcraft cases. A woman who owned property and lived alone, according to the threat, could potentially leave that property outside the male line of descent. This possibility, according to the patriarchal system, was intolerable. Meet Bridget Bishop, one of the first people executed in the Salem witch trials in 1692. According to historical records, she was a twice-widowed woman who owned property including taverns and orchards. She dressed, according to descriptions, in fashionable and colourful clothing rather than sombre widow's garb. She ran, according to her business, her taverns independently. She had, according to the evidence, some enemies from property disputes and business competition. Her ownership of productive property, according to analysis of her case, made her threatening. She had money, land, and businesses without a husband to control them. She dressed as she pleased according to her choices, showing she wasn't properly submissive to community standards for widows. She competed, according to her business activity, with men in the tavern trade. All of this, according to the case against her, suggested an unnatural woman who might well have supernatural help. She was hanged according to her execution as a witch. Her property, according to the aftermath, was seized. The message, according to what was communicated, was clear. Women who had too much independence and property would be brought down. The accusation of witchcraft, according to its function, was a tool to enforce proper gender hierarchies when women stepped out of line. According to broader patterns, women who inherited property from fathers or husbands and then chose to manage it themselves, rather than remarrying or turning management over to male relatives, faced particular scrutiny. The capacity to own property, according to the implication, was not the same as the right to exercise independent control over it. A woman might legally inherit land, according to the law, but exercising actual control over it, according to social expectations, required male oversight. Think about the trap this created. According to inheritance laws, women could sometimes own property, but according to social and religious expectations, they shouldn't exercise independent control over it. If you inherited a house and land, according to the proper path, you should quickly remarry so a husband could manage it, or you should live with male relatives who would handle property matters. If you actually lived alone and managed your own property, according to the suspicion this raised, something was wrong, and that wrong, according to the framework available, must be witchcraft. Now let's examine the daily surveillance and suspicion that solitary women faced in their communities. According to the social structure of medieval and early modern villages and towns, everyone watched everyone else. But according to the intensity of scrutiny, women living alone were watched more carefully than anyone. Their every action, according to the observation, was noted and could later be used as evidence against them. Meet Margot de la Barre, living in a French village in 1600. According to your life, you are a widow in your late 40s who lives alone in a small house at the edge of the village. You support yourself. According to your work, through weaving and selling cloth at the market, you cause no trouble. According to objective assessment, and keep to yourself. But according to your awareness, you are being watched constantly. Your neighbours, according to their observations, note what time you wake up each morning. If you rise before dawn, according to one interpretation, you might be meeting with demons while others sleep. If you sleep late, according to another suspicion, you were probably out flying to a Sabbath the night before and need extra rest. There is no safe time to wake up, according to the trap, when everything you do is suspicious. They watch, according to the surveillance, when you draw water from the well. If you go early when few others are there, according to the reading, you are antisocial and probably brewing evil potions in private. If you go during busy times, according to the opposite interpretation, you are trying too hard to seem normal and are probably spying on others to choose your next victims. They note, according to their scrutiny, if you speak to people at the well or if you remain silent. Speech is suspicious. Silence is suspicious. Everything, according to the impossible situation, is suspicious. Your garden, according to the watching, is examined constantly. What are you growing, according to the questions? If you grow common vegetables, according to one view, you are probably hiding something more sinister among the cabbages. If you grow herbs, according to the danger, you are clearly preparing magical potions or poisons. A particularly healthy garden, according to suspicious thinking, suggests you are using unnatural means to make things grow. A poor garden, according to the alternate interpretation, shows you are cursing the earth itself. They observe, according to the constant monitoring, when you light your candle at night. If your window glows late into the evening, according to the interpretation, you must be performing rituals or consulting with demons. If you go dark early, according to another theory, you are sneaking out under cover of darkness to cause harm. The women across the lane, according to your awareness, sometimes sit by their window specifically to watch your house and note your activities. According to the season, different activities raise different suspicions. In spring, when you plant your garden, neighbours watch to see if you mutter while planting. Are you blessing the seeds or cursing them? In summer, when your vegetables grow, they note if your harvest is better than theirs. Is it natural skill or supernatural help? In fall, when you preserve food for winter, they wonder what you are really putting in those jars. In winter, when your firewood burns, They speculate about what else you might be burning in your hearth. Meet the concept of neighbourly testimony, which, according to trial procedures, was considered especially valuable evidence. According to the reasoning, neighbours knew an accused woman's daily habits and could testify to suspicious patterns. But, according to the reality, years of observation filtered through suspicion and fear could turn the most innocent actions into evidence of witchcraft. At your trial, according to the testimonies against you, neighbours provide detailed accounts of your supposedly suspicious behaviour. One woman testifies, according to her statement, that you were seen talking to yourself while working at your loom. You were, according to reality, probably singing or thinking aloud, something people living alone commonly do. But, according to her interpretation, you were conversing with demonic spirits who taught you weaving skills. Another neighbour testifies, according to his account, that your cow gave more milk than his despite his cow being younger and stronger. You had, according to the fact, simply taken better care of your animal and perhaps fed it better. But according to his belief, you must have magically transferred his cow's milk to yours through witchcraft. The fact that you lived alone, according to his reasoning, explained how you had time to perform such evil magic. A woman with a family wouldn't have such free time. A third witness claims, according to her testimony, that she once saw you standing in your doorway during a thunderstorm, watching the lightning. You were, according to the likely truth, probably just watching the dramatic storm, as people do. But according to her interpretation, you were communing with the devil who rides the storm winds. She noticed, according to her observation, that the lightning never struck your house, obviously because you had Satan's protection. According to the accumulated weight of these testimonies, a picture emerges of a woman whose entire life was evidence of witchcraft. Every normal action, according to the reframing, became supernatural. Every bit of good fortune, according to the jealous interpretation, became proof of demonic assistance. Every moment of solitude, according to the suspicious reading, became an opportunity for evil deeds. The constant surveillance, according to its psychological effect, created impossible pressure on women living alone. You could never, according to the awareness, truly relax or be yourself. You had to perform normalcy constantly, but there was no agreement on what normalcy looked like. What one neighbour considered appropriately humble behaviour, according to conflicting standards, another might interpret as suspiciously meek. What one saw as proper piety, according to different views, another might see as excessive and therefore hypocritical. According to the records of witch trials in German territories, particularly detailed accounts of daily observations appear in the evidence. Witnesses would testify, according to their statements, that they had watched the accused woman for months or even years, noting patterns of behaviour. The woman might, according to testimony, always spin her wool counterclockwise instead of clockwise, obviously a reversal showing her allegiance to the devil who reverses all godly things. She might, according to observation, water her garden by moonlight, clearly performing magic rituals under the moon's power. She might, according to another witness, always walk on the right side of the street instead of the left, or vice versa, some deviation from local norm that proved her contrary, unnatural spirit. Meet Katharina Hennert, a respected postmaster in Cologne who was executed for witchcraft in 1627, despite being from a prominent family. According to her unusual position, she had inherited her father's position as postmaster and ran the postal service independently. She was, according to records, unmarried and lived in her own house with servants. Her competence, according to her success, should have protected her, but according to the jealousy and suspicion, her independence and authority made her a target. Her neighbours, according to testimony at her trial, had watched her for years. They noted, according to their observations, that mail she handled seemed to reach its destination more reliably than mail handled by her male counterparts. Suspicious efficiency, suggesting supernatural help. They remarked, according to their statements, that she seemed to need less sleep than normal people, obvious evidence that demons were sustaining her unnatural strength. They observed, according to their surveillance, that she had visitors at all hours for postal business. These must be secret meetings with her coven. Katharina protested, according to her defense, that everything she did was legitimate business related to her position as postmaster. The mail arrived reliably, according to the simple explanation, because she was good at her job. She slept less, according to the reality, because running the postal service required long hours. Visitors came at irregular times, according to the nature of postal work, because urgent messages didn't respect normal business hours. But according to the prosecution, her explanations were lies meant to hide her witchcraft. She was tortured, according to the procedure, and eventually confessed to making a pact with the devil. She was strangled and burned, according to her execution, in 1627. Her property, according to the aftermath, was confiscated. The Cologne City Council, according to later analysis, had wanted to seize control of the postal service from her family, and the witchcraft accusation served that political and economic purpose perfectly. According to the lesson of Katharina's case and thousands like it, no amount of respectability, no level of competence, no degree of adherence to proper behavior could fully protect a woman who lived with too much independence. The surveillance, according to its function, existed not to observe reality, but to find evidence of predetermined guilt. When a community decided a solitary woman was a witch, according to the confirmation bias, every observed action would be interpreted to confirm that belief. Now let's examine how religion and theology reinforced the idea that solitary women were spiritually dangerous. According to Christian theology as interpreted in this period, women were considered more susceptible to the devil's temptations than men. Eve's original sin, according to the reasoning, showed female weakness. A woman without a man's spiritual guidance, according to the logic, was especially vulnerable to Satan. Meet the Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1486 by Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger. According to this influential book, which became the handbook for witch hunters across Europe, women were more inclined to witchcraft than men because of their inherent weaknesses. The text, according to its argument, explained that women were more credulous, more impressionable, more carnal, and weaker in both faith and body. A woman alone, according to the Malleus, was a woman unprotected by male authority, and therefore an open door for demonic influence. The text specifically, according to its content, discussed why widows and unmarried women were particularly likely to become witches. A woman with a husband, according to the reasoning, had his spiritual headship to protect her from the devil, but a woman without a husband, according to the vulnerability, lacked this protection. The devil, according to demonological theory, actively sought out such women because they were easier prey. Their loneliness, according to the explanation, made them desperate for companionship, even if that companionship came from demons. Their lack of sexual outlet with a legitimate husband, according to the claim, made them vulnerable to the devil's sexual temptations. According to sermons and religious writings from the period, preachers regularly warned about the spiritual dangers of unmarried women living alone. Such women, according to the warnings, should either marry, join convents where they'd be under religious supervision, or live with relatives where they'd have moral oversight. A woman living completely independently, according to the theological position, was living in defiance of God's ordained order, and defiance of God's order, according to the logic, opened one to Satan's influence. Meet the specific regional variations in how solitary women were persecuted, because according to geography and local customs, the form of witch hunts differed even as the targeting of independent women remained constant. In the Germanic territories of the Holy Roman Empire, according to the intensity of persecution, witch trials reached their peak with particularly brutal methods and high execution numbers. Solitary women, according to the statistics, made up the majority of victims in these regions. In the Prince-Bishopric of W. Wartburg, according to the horrific period from 1626 to 1631, an estimated 900 people were executed for witchcraft. The Prince-Bishop, according to his zeal, built a special witch house. a prison designed specifically to hold and torture accused witches. According to the construction, it featured multiple cells, torture chambers, and a chapel where the condemned could make their final confessions before execution. The efficiency, according to its grim purpose, was designed to process accusations quickly and in volume. Meet Anna Hansen, one of the countless women processed through this system in 1629. According to her circumstances, she was a widow in her 60s who lived alone in a small house in Doubletsburg. She supported herself, according to her modest means, through spinning and doing laundry for wealthier households. She had lived, according to the years, peacefully in Doubletsburg for over 3 decades since her husband's death. But according to the witch panic of 1629, 3 decades of quiet life meant nothing. She was accused, according to the charge, by a woman who had previously been tortured into confession. That woman, according to the procedure, had been forced to name accomplices, and Anna's name was on the list. Anna was arrested, according to the process, and taken to the witch house. There, according to the conditions, she was placed in a cell barely large enough to lie down in, with no light except what filtered through a small grate near the ceiling. The interrogation, according to the method, began with questioning while she was kept in heavy iron chains. The questioners, according to their technique, asked her to confess to making a pact with the devil, attending Sabbaths, and harming her neighbours through witchcraft. Anna denied everything, according to her initial response, insisting she was a good Christian woman who had never harmed anyone. This denial, according to the procedure, simply meant the interrogation would escalate to torture. According to the torture progression used in Doubletsburg, there were multiple stages of increasing severity. The first stage, according to the method, involved thumbscrews, iron devices that crushed the thumbs with excruciating pain. Anna's thumbs, according to the application, were placed in the screws and slowly compressed. The pain, according to her screams, was unbearable, but according to her stubbornness or genuine innocence, she continued to deny being a witch. The second stage, according to the escalation, involved leg screws, similar devices that were applied to the shins, crushing the bones. Anna, according to her agony, begged for mercy, but still maintained her innocence. The interrogators, according to their interpretation, viewed her continued denial as evidence that she was being sustained by demonic power. A normal woman, according to their belief, would have confessed by now to stop the pain. The third stage, according to the procedure, was the strappado. Anna's hands, according to the method, were tied behind her back and attached to a rope. She was then, according to the torture, hoisted up so that her entire body weight hung from her arms, dislocating her shoulders. She hung, according to the duration, for extended periods. Sometimes, according to the variation, weights were attached to her feet to increase the pain and damage. During the strappado, according to the breaking point, Anna finally began to confess. She said, according to the words they wanted to hear, that the devil had come to her one night when she was alone in her house. He had, according to the false confession, appeared in the form of a handsome man and promised her money and companionship if she would renounce God and serve him. She had agreed, according to the coerced story, because her loneliness and poverty had made her desperate. The confession, according to its elaboration, continued with details about Sabbaths she had supposedly attended. She described, according to the formal AC script that emerged from torture, flying through the air to meetings in the forest, where witches danced with demons, desecrated the cross, and plotted harm against Christians. She named, according to the pressure, other women who she said were present at these Sabbaths. More solitary women, more widows, more unmarried women living independently. Anna was convicted according to the verdict based on her confession. She was strangled and burned according to the execution in July 1629. Her small house, according to the property disposal, was confiscated. The other women she had named under torture, according to the chain reaction, were arrested in turn. Several of them, according to the same process, were also tortured, confessed, and executed. The witch panic, according to its momentum, fed on itself. According to the distinctive practice in Scotland, witch trials took a particularly harsh form, with emphasis on demonic pacts and the devil's mark. Scottish interrogators, according to their methods, were especially concerned with finding physical proof of witchcraft on the accused women's bodies. Solitary women, according to their vulnerability, had no family members to protect them from the invasive searches. Meet Isabel Young, tried in Edinburgh in 1629. According to her situation, she was an unmarried woman in her 50s who lived alone and worked as a midwife and healer. Her skills, according to her reputation, had made her valuable to the community for decades. But according to the changing climate, those same skills now made her suspect. She was accused, according to the charge, of using witchcraft to harm a baby she had delivered who later died. At her trial, according to the procedure, she was subjected to the searching for the devil's mark. A group of appointed women, according to the practice, stripped her naked and examined every inch of her body. They were looking, according to the belief, for any mark where the devil had touched her, or where her familiar spirit suckled her blood. Any mole, wart, scar, birthmark, or discoloration, according to the interpretation, could be declared suspicious. The searchers, according to their technique, used long pins to prick any suspicious areas. According to the theory, a true devil's mark would not bleed and would cause no pain because it was not natural flesh, but a demonic seal. If the woman flinched or bled, according to one outcome, they would move to the next spot. If she didn't react according to the opposite outcome, they had found their proof, and according to the certainty of motivated searchers, they always found what they were looking for. In Isabel's case, according to the report, the searchers claimed to find a small dark spot on her shoulder that didn't bleed when pricked. The reality, according to modern understanding, was probably a small area of scar tissue, or simply a spot where the searchers pressed less hard or lied about the result. But, according to the trial evidence, this devil's mark proved her guilt. She was convicted, according to the verdict, and burned. According to the English practice, witchcraft accusations often came through cunning people, folk healers and wise women being turned against when their remedies failed, or when they offended powerful neighbours. English law, according to its development, made witchcraft a civil crime rather than a heresy, which meant different procedures than in continental Europe. But according to the outcome for solitary women, the results were similarly deadly. Meet Joan Prentice, executed in Essex, England in 1589. According to trial records, she was an elderly woman living alone who was known for curing illnesses and finding lost objects. She had, according to years of practice, helped many people in her community, but according to a conflict with a wealthy landlord who wanted her evicted from her cottage, she became vulnerable to accusation. The landlord's son, according to the accusation, claimed that Joan had cursed him after his father tried to evict her. He fell ill, according to the timing, shortly after the eviction attempt. Joan, according to the charge, had supposedly sent her familiar spirit, a ferret, to torment him. The young man's fits and illness, according to the diagnosis, were proof of her witchcraft. At trial, according to the evidence, witnesses testified to seeing Joan's ferret. She had, according to the reality, probably been feeding a wild ferret that lived near her cottage, a harmless act of kindness to an animal. But according to the reframing, this ferret was a demon in animal form serving the witch. Joan's living alone, according to the argument, explained why she needed a familiar spirit. She had no human family, so she consorted with demons instead. Joan was convicted, according to the verdict, and hanged. Her cottage, according to the outcome, was emptied and given to a new tenant. The landlord, according to the benefit, got exactly what he wanted. The troublesome old woman removed and her home freed up. The witchcraft accusation, according to its utility, had served as a perfect tool for removing an inconvenient woman who had legal rights to her dwelling. According to the Basque region spanning parts of Spain and France, Witch trials took a distinctive form with emphasis on Sabbath gatherings and elaborate confessions. The Spanish Inquisition, according to its involvement, actually showed more skepticism about witchcraft than secular courts. But according to local beliefs and pressures, prosecutions still occurred, and solitary women, according to the pattern, remained primary targets. Meet Maria de Chimildegu, tried in the Basque Country in 1610 as part of a larger witch panic. According to her circumstances, she was a widow who lived alone in a small farmhouse in the mountains. She raised, according to her work, sheep and made cheese to sell at market. Her isolation, according to geography, was partly due to the remote location of her farm, but according to suspicious interpretation, her choice to live alone in such a remote place suggested she was hiding evil activities. When several children in a nearby village fell ill with convulsions, according to the outbreak, which panic swept the region, Maria, according to her vulnerability as a solitary woman, was one of the first accused. She was said, according to the charges, to fly to Sabbath meetings at night where she and other witches plotted harm against Christians and worshipped the devil in the form of a great black goat. During interrogation, according to the pressure she faced, Maria initially denied everything, but according to the threats of torture and the testimony of others who had already confessed and named her, she eventually gave a confession. She described, according to the coerced details, elaborate Sabbath gatherings with dancing, feasting, and obscene rituals. She named, according to the formula, other women from the region as fellow witches. However, according to the intervention of Inquisitor Alonso de Salazar y Ferreras, Maria's case took an unusual turn. Salazar, according to his skepticism, investigated the witch accusations carefully and concluded that most of them were false confessions extracted through fear and pressure. He argued, according to his report, that there was no real evidence of actual witchcraft and that the confessions were unreliable. Maria, according to this intervention, was eventually released rather than executed, a rare outcome. According to Salazar's analysis, which he detailed in a famous report, the witch confessions shared suspicious similarities because accused women were repeating what interrogators suggested to them under duress. The emphasis on solitary women, according to his observation, was based on social prejudice rather than actual evidence of harmful magic. His skepticism, according to its influence, helped reduce witch prosecutions in areas under Inquisition jurisdiction, though secular courts continued executing women elsewhere. Meet Tituba, the enslaved woman whose testimony helped ignite the Salem witch trials. According to historical records, she was brought from Barbados by the Reverend Samuel Parris and lived in his household. When his daughter and niece began having fits according to the events, Tituba was among those accused. She confessed, according to her testimony likely given under threat of torture, to making a pact with the devil. Her confession, according to its content, included details about the devil appearing to her, other women flying through the air to meetings, and the use of magic to harm people. Tituba's vulnerable position, according to analysis of her case, made her an easy target for the initial accusations. She was enslaved, according to her status, which meant she had no legal rights or protection. She was from Barbados, according to her origin, which made her foreign and suspect to the Puritan community. She lived in someone else's household according to her lack of independence, but had no male protector of her own. She knew, according to her cultural background, Caribbean folk practices that the Puritans saw as demonic. All of these factors, according to their combination, made her perfect scapegoat material. Her confession, according to its impact, set the pattern for the Salem trials. The details she provided, according to their influence, shaped what accusers and accused said in subsequent cases. The idea of a group of witches meeting with the devil, according to Tituba's testimony, became central to the Salem narrative. A woman alone or a woman with suspicious independence, according to the pattern established, might be part of this devil-worshipping conspiracy. According to theological reasoning, the devil's pact was essentially a marriage between the witch and Satan. The witch, according to this conception, pledged herself to the devil in exchange for power, much as a wife pledged herself to a husband. This theological framework, according to its implications, meant that a woman who rejected human marriage might instead have married Satan. Her independence, according to the interpretation, wasn't really independence at all. She'd just chosen a different, evil master instead of a legitimate husband. Think about how this theology trapped women. According to the religious framework, a woman needed male authority for spiritual safety. If you were under a husband's or father's authority, according to the theory, you had protection from the devil. But if you lived alone, according to the danger, you were exposed to demonic attack. And if you seemed to be managing fine living alone, according to the suspicious conclusion, you must be getting help from somewhere. That help, according to the available explanation, must be Satan providing for his servant. Now, let's explore the horrific conditions in the prisons where accused women awaited trial and execution. According to the detention practices, women arrested for witchcraft were placed in dungeons and cells that were deliberately harsh. The suffering, according to its purpose, was meant to break their will and make them confess. For solitary women, according to their lack of family support, these conditions were especially deadly. Meet the witch prison in Bamberg, Germany, built specifically to hold accused witches during the trials of the 1620s. According to the structure, it was a fortress-like building with multiple levels of underground cells. The deepest cells, according to their location, were essentially underground pits where light never reached. The temperature, according to the seasons, was freezing in winter and stifling in summer. The walls, according to descriptions, were damp and covered in mould. The smell, according to accounts, was overwhelming, a mixture of human waste, decay, and fear. Meet Dorothea Flock, arrested in Bamberg in 1630 and held in this prison. According to her circumstances, she was a widow in her 50s who had lived alone since her husband's death 15 years earlier. She had supported herself, according to her work, through herb gathering and selling remedies. When a child in the town died after taking one of her remedies for fever, according to the accusation, she was arrested for witchcraft. In the prison, according to her conditions, Dorothea was placed in a cell with 3 other accused women. The cell, according to its size, was barely large enough for one person to lie down, much less 4. The women, according to the cramped space, had to take turns sitting and standing. There was no bed, according to the lack of furnishings, just bare stone floor that was often wet with water seeping through the walls. There was no latrine. According to the sanitation, just a corner of the cell that served as a toilet. Food, according to the provision, came once a day, a small piece of bread and a cup of water. The bread, according to its quality, was often mouldy. The water, according to its source, was questionable and sometimes made the prisoners sick. For solitary women, according to their lack of family, there were no supplemental meals brought by relatives. Married women or women with family, according to the advantage, sometimes had family members bribe guards to bring better food or blankets. Solitary women, according to their isolation, had no one to help them. The cold, according to the suffering it caused, was particularly brutal. In winter, according to the temperature, the underground cells were barely above freezing. The women, according to their clothing, had only what they'd been wearing when arrested. Dorothea had, according to her summer arrest, only a light linen dress. As winter came, according to the cold, she shivered constantly. Her cellmates, according to the shared misery, pressed together for warmth, but it was never enough. Disease, according to the inevitable outcome, spread rapidly in these conditions. The combination of cold, malnutrition, overcrowding, and poor sanitation, according to their effect, created perfect conditions for illness. Typhus, according to its frequency, was common in witch prisons. So were dysentery, pneumonia, and what was called jail fever, probably a combination of various infections. Many accused women, according to the statistics, died in prison before they could be tried or executed. Dorothea, according to her fate, developed a fever and cough in November. Her cellmates, according to their fear of contagion, tried to stay as far from her as possible in the tiny space. Guards, according to their indifference, did nothing to help. One of her cellmates, according to an attempt at mercy, shared her own meagre water ration with Dorothea. But according to the progression of illness, Dorothea grew worse. She died, according to the record, in early December 1630, before she was ever brought to trial. Her body, according to the disposal, was taken from the cell and buried in unconsecrated ground, the fate of accused witches who died before proving their innocence or receiving last rites. Her property, according to the legal procedure, was still confiscated as if she had been convicted. The child's parents, according to their certainty, viewed her death as proof of guilt. Surely God had struck her down for her crimes. Her death, according to its invisibility, was barely noted. She was just one more solitary woman who disappeared into the witch prison and never came out. According to the experiences of women who survived imprisonment and were eventually released, a rare outcome, the psychological damage was severe and lasting. The darkness, the isolation, the constant fear, the physical suffering, according to their combined effect, traumatized survivors deeply. Many, according to accounts, were never the same after their ordeal in the witch prisons. Meet Barbara Schwartz, imprisoned in a German witch prison for 8 months before being released when her accuser recanted. According to her testimony after release, the worst part wasn't the physical suffering, though that was terrible. The worst part, according to her description, was the psychological torture of knowing she was innocent, but being unable to prove it, of hearing other women scream under torture in nearby rooms, of waiting each day to be called for interrogation, knowing that torture awaited. The isolation from the outside world, according to Barbara's account, was disorienting. In the windowless cell, according to the effect, she lost track of time. She didn't know, according to her confusion, if it was day or night, what month it was, how long she'd been imprisoned. The guards, according to their communication, told the prisoners nothing. The women, according to their speculation, could only guess what was happening from the sounds they heard. Screams, executions, new prisoners arriving. The guards, according to their behaviour towards solitary women, were often particularly cruel. A woman with family, according to the protection, might have relatives who could complain about mistreatment or bribe guards for better treatment, but a solitary woman, according to her vulnerability, had no one to protect her. Guards, according to their power, could abuse accused women with impunity. Sexual assault, according to the unspoken reality, was common but rarely recorded. A woman who complained, according to the response, would be told she was lying, or that she had seduced the guard through witchcraft. Now let's explore the few women who resisted accusations and survived to tell about it. According to the overwhelming pressure to confess, most accused women eventually gave in, especially under torture. But according to remarkable courage, some women maintained their innocence even unto death, and a very few managed to survive by fighting the accusations. Meet Katharina Kepler, mother of the famous astronomer Johannes Kepler, accused of witchcraft in Wittenberg, Germany in 1615. According to her circumstances, she was a widow in her 70s who lived alone. She was, according to neighbourhood reports, argumentative, independent-minded, and had a reputation for herbal knowledge. She had, according to the accusations, supposedly cursed several neighbours and caused their illnesses through witchcraft. What made Katharina's case unusual, according to the key factor, was that her son Johannes was an important imperial mathematician with connections to powerful people. When Katharina was arrested, according to Johannes's response, he immediately began working to save her. He hired lawyers according to his resources, the best he could afford. He wrote letters according to his influence to important officials. He prepared, according to his scientific knowledge, careful rebuttals of the accusations based on logic and evidence. The legal battle, according to its duration, lasted 6 years. Katharina was imprisoned, according to the ordeal, for 14 months. She was subjected, according to the procedure, to being shown the torture instruments and told in detail what would be done to her if she didn't confess. This showing of instruments according to the practice was itself a form of torture meant to terrify the accused into confession without actually having to apply the instruments. Katharina, according to her remarkable courage, refused to confess. She maintained, according to her statements, that she was innocent of all charges. She told the interrogators, according to witness accounts, that they could tear her apart, but she would not confess to crimes she didn't commit. Her age, according to one factor in her survival, worked in her favour. The authorities were somewhat reluctant to torture a woman in her 70s to death. Her son's influence, according to the crucial factor, provided protection that most solitary women didn't have. Eventually, according to the outcome, Katharina was released in 1621 without being convicted. The case, according to its conclusion, was essentially dropped, but according to the damage, Katharina's health was broken by the imprisonment and stress. She died, according to her death, 6 months after her release. Johannes Kepler, according to his writings, was deeply affected by his mother's persecution and wrote about the injustice of witch trials. Katharina's case, according to its exceptional nature, highlights how rare it was for accused women to successfully resist. She had, according to her advantages, a powerful son who could fight for her. She had, according to her strength, remarkable courage and stubbornness. She had, according to luck, sympathetic judges who were influenced by her son's arguments. Most solitary women, according to the reality, had none of these advantages. Meet another rare survivor. Alison Balfour of Orkney, Scotland, accused of witchcraft in 1594. According to the accusations, she was a widow who was said to have used witchcraft to try to kill several prominent men. The evidence, according to its flimsiness, was largely based on the testimony of people who claimed to have seen her familiar spirits. Alison, according to her defense, denied all charges. She was subjected, according to the horrific procedure, to torture not just of herself, but of her family. The Scottish authorities, according to their cruelty, placed her husband, her son, and her 7-year-old daughter in torture devices in front of Alison and told her she could stop their suffering by confessing. Her husband, according to the torture, was placed in leg irons so tight they broke his bones. Her son, according to his ordeal, had his legs crushed in the iron boot. Her daughter, according to the horror, had her fingers crushed in thumbscrews. Alison, according to the breaking of her will, confessed to save her family from further torture, but according to her later retraction, she immediately recanted her confession once the torture stopped, saying it was false and extracted through the suffering of her children. This retraction, according to the legal complication, created problems for the prosecution. A confession made under torture and then retracted was, according to legal theory, supposed to be invalid. The case, according to its unusual progression, dragged on. Alison was imprisoned for years, according to the duration, but was eventually released without execution. The exact reason, according to historical uncertainty, is not entirely clear from surviving records, but according to one factor, the torture of small children had been so extreme that even in that brutal time it had caused some scandal. Alison's survival, according to its rarity, was exceptional. These stories of resistance and survival, according to their importance, remind us that not every accused woman went quietly to her death. Some fought, according to their courage, even when fighting seemed hopeless. Some survived, according to their determination and luck, against terrible odds. But according to the tragic reality, they were the exceptions. The vast majority of accused solitary women, according to the pattern, had no powerful sons to defend them, no family to fight for them, no legal resources to draw on. Now let's explore specific communities and how they turned against their solitary women. According to community dynamics, small villages and towns where everyone knew everyone else's business were particularly dangerous for women who lived alone. You couldn't, according to the visibility, hide any aspect of your life. Every action, according to the observation, was noted and could be interpreted as evidence. Meet the village of Walternienburg in Germany, where in 1671 a series of witch trials targeted multiple women. According to court records analysed by historian Lyndall Roper, many of the accused were older women living alone or semi-independently. The accusations, according to their pattern, came from neighbours who'd had disputes with these women. One woman, according to the case, was accused after she'd quarrelled with a neighbour over a property boundary. Another, according to a different case, was accused after she'd refused to lend money to someone who'd been rude to her. The village dynamics, according to analysis, created a situation where resentments could fester. A woman living alone, according to her position, was already marginal to the community. She wasn't part of a family unit that was integrated into village social networks. She had, according to her limited connections, fewer people to defend her or speak up for her. When something went wrong in the village, crops failed, children died, cattle sickened. According to the scapegoating mechanism, she was an easy target for blame. According to the interrogation records, accused women were asked detailed questions about their daily activities. Where did you go? According to the questioning. Who did you speak to? According to the suspicion in the questions. What did you say? According to the search for incriminating statements. The interrogators, according to their assumptions, were looking for evidence that the woman had cursed people, made pacts with demons, or engaged in maleficium harmful magic. Now let's examine the execution methods used for convicted witches, and how these spectacles functioned as public warnings to other solitary women. According to the practice, executions were public events designed to demonstrate the power of authorities and to terrorize any other women who might be tempted toward independence or unacceptable behavior. Meet the execution of Murga Bayan, burned alive in Fulda, Germany in 1603. According to her background, she was a wealthy widow who had inherited substantial property from her late husband. She lived, according to her independence, in her own house with servants, but no male family member to control her. She had, according to the suspicion, remarried a man 20 years younger than herself, which itself suggested unnatural influence. How else could an older woman attract a younger man except through witchcraft? She was accused, according to the charges, of killing her second husband and 2 children through poisoning. The accusation, according to its timing, came after she had borne her new husband children, which threatened the inheritance rights of relatives from her first marriage. She was arrested while pregnant, according to the cruelty, with her 6th child. During interrogation, according to the procedure, she was tortured extensively. She confessed, according to the coercion, to witchcraft, poisoning, and making a pact with the devil. The execution, according to its details, was carried out with particular brutality because of her wealth and the prominence of her case. She gave birth according to the sequence. While in prison, the baby, according to its fate, died shortly after birth, possibly from the poor conditions, possibly from being deliberately left to die as the offspring of a witch. Murga was then, according to the sentence, taken to the place of execution. The execution site, according to its location, was carefully chosen to be visible from much of the town. A large wooden stake, according to the construction, had been driven into the ground with bundles of wood and straw piled around it. The executioner, according to his role, was a specialized professional whose job was to carry out death sentences. For a burning, according to the procedure, he would arrange the wood to ensure the fire burned hot enough and long enough to kill. Murga was brought, according to the process, to the stake in a cart. The townspeople, according to the custom, had gathered to watch. Executions, according to their function, were public spectacles that everyone was expected to attend. Attendance, according to the social requirement, was virtually mandatory. Staying away might suggest sympathy with the witch. Parents brought, according to the practice, their children to witness the execution and learn the consequences of straying from godly behaviour. She was bound, according to the method, to the stake with chains. Her final moments, according to witnesses, were spent proclaiming her innocence. But according to the interpretation, such last-minute protestations were dismissed as the devil trying to save his servant. The executioner, according to procedure in some cases, would strangle the condemned woman before lighting the fire as an act of mercy. But in Murga's case, according to the decision, no such mercy was shown. the fire was lit, according to the execution, while she was fully conscious. The burning, according to its horrific reality, took time. The smoke, according to one form of death, might cause suffocation before the flames reached the victim. But according to wind conditions and how the fire was built, this wasn't always the case. Murga's screams, according to witnesses, could be heard across the town. The smell, according to the sensory horror of burning flesh, filled the air. The crowd, according to their reaction, watched in a mixture of fear, satisfaction, and horror. Her property, according to the aftermath, was confiscated by the authorities. The relatives who had likely prompted the accusations, according to the outcome, received nothing. The wealth went to the state. Her name, according to the stigma, was blackened forever. To be descended from a witch, according to the social consequence, carried shame for generations. Her surviving children from her first marriage, according to their fate, would carry the stain of having a mother executed as a witch. According to the function of public executions, they served multiple purposes beyond simply killing the convicted woman. They demonstrated, according to the display of power, the authority of the state and church. They provided, according to the social bonding, a communal experience that united townspeople against a designated evil. They offered, according to the psychological function, a release for community anxiety and fear, and they warned, according to the threat, any other women watching that independence and deviation from prescribed roles would be punished. The methods of execution, according to regional variations, differed somewhat by location. In Germanic territories, according to the common practice, burning was the standard method for convicted witches. The fire, according to the symbolism, purified the world of the witch's evil and prevented her body from being buried in consecrated ground where it might contaminate holy soil. Some regions, according to their procedure, strangled the witch before burning as a mercy. Others, according to their severity, burned witches alive. In England and English territories, according to the method, hanging was more common than burning for convicted witches. The condemned woman, according to the procedure, would be taken to a gallows, placed on a cart or ladder with a noose around her neck, and then the cart removed or the ladder turned, leaving her to hang. Death by hanging, according to the mechanics, came from either a broken neck if the drop was sufficient, or from slow strangulation if it wasn't. Solitary women, according to their lack of family, often had no one to pull on their legs to speed death by breaking the neck, a grim service sometimes performed by relatives of the condemned. In Scotland, according to a particularly harsh practice, convicted witches were strangled and then their bodies were burned. The strangulation, according to the method, was done with a garrote or by the executioner's hands. The burning afterward, according to its purpose, ensured the body could not be buried whole. The ashes, according to the disposal, were scattered or buried in unconsecrated ground. Meet Janet Douglas, Lady Glamis, burned at the stake in Edinburgh in 1537. According to her high rank, she was a noblewoman, which shows that even status wasn't always protection. She was accused, according to the political motivation, of plotting to poison King James V through witchcraft. The accusation, according to its basis, was almost certainly false and politically motivated. But according to the use of witchcraft charges, they were convenient tools to eliminate political enemies, especially women who had power or property. She was burned, according to the execution, on Castle Hill in Edinburgh in front of a large crowd. Her execution, according to its visibility from the castle, was deliberately staged to maximize its impact as a warning. Even noblewomen, according to the message, could be brought down if they threatened the wrong people. Her death, according to the political outcome, allowed her enemies to seize her family's property and eliminate her family's influence. The aftermath of executions for communities, according to its complexity, was mixed. On one hand, according to relief, people felt they had eliminated the source of their misfortunes. If crops had been failing or children dying, according to the hope, these problems would now cease because the witch was dead. On the other hand, according to the unacknowledged reality, the problems usually continued, because they had natural causes that the execution didn't address. When misfortunes continued after an execution, according to the logic of witch panic, this proved there must be more witches. The chain of accusations, according to the pattern, would continue. Each executed woman who had confessed under torture, according to the mechanism, had named other women as accomplices. These women, according to the cycle, would be arrested, tortured, forced to confess, and forced to name still others. The witch panic, according to its self-perpetuating nature, fed on itself until exhaustion, political intervention, or complete decimation of the accused population finally ended it. In some villages, according to the devastating impact, so many women were executed that demographic imbalances resulted. The village of Wissenstey in Germany, according to historical records, executed 63 women in 1563. For a small village, according to the proportion, this was a catastrophic loss of population. The village of Quedlinburg, according to another example, executed 133 women in a single day in 1589. The social fabric, according to the damage, was torn apart by these mass executions. The economic impact, according to another consequence, was significant. Women who were executed according to their roles had been performing essential labor: spinning, weaving, brewing, baking, healing, midwifery, gardening, dairy work. Their removal, according to the effect, left gaps in the economic and social structure. Solitary women, according to their economic contribution, had often filled specialized niches. The skilled midwife who was burned as a witch, according to her absence, left the community with fewer options for safe childbirth. The healer whose knowledge died with her, according to the loss, was not easily replaced. For surviving solitary women watching these executions, according to the psychological impact, the message was clear and terrifying. Your independence, according to the warning, could get you killed. Your skills and knowledge, according to the danger, made you vulnerable rather than valuable. Your living alone, according to the stigma, marked you as suspicious. The safest path, according to the lesson, was to find a male protector, to hide any skills or independence, to blend in and avoid notice. Living alone, according to the interrogation framework, made explaining your activities more difficult. If you lived with family, according to the alibi they could provide, you had witnesses to where you were and what you were doing. If you lived alone, according to the absence of witnesses, you could have been doing anything. Late at night when you were supposedly sleeping, according to the accusation, you might actually have been flying to a Sabbath. When you walked to the market, according to suspicious interpretation, you might have stopped to curse someone's field. Your solitary life, according to the prosecution, gave you opportunity for secret evil. Meet the case of the Pappenheimer family, executed in Bavaria in 1600. According to historical records, while this was a family, the case illustrates how communities turned on marginal members. The family, according to their lifestyle, were itinerant trash collectors and latrine cleaners, necessary but despised work. When accused of witchcraft, according to the charges, the accusations included decades of supposed crimes. The community, according to the testimony, had apparently harbored suspicions for years, but only acted when the family's marginality made them vulnerable. The parallel to solitary women, according to the comparison, is clear. Both faced accumulated suspicion that built over time. Both were marginal to normal community structures. Both were vulnerable when the community needed scapegoats. The difference, according to the key distinction, was that a family had some mutual protection, while a woman alone had none. According to village dynamics, conformity was survival. You needed, according to the social requirement, to attend church regularly, participate in community activities, help neighbors when asked, and generally demonstrate that you were a normal, godly person. But according to the paradox, if you were too friendly and social as a solitary woman, you might be accused of trying to insinuate yourself into places you didn't belong or of seeking victims for your magic. If you kept to yourself, According to the opposite suspicion, you are obviously hiding something. The acceptable middle ground, according to its narrowness, was difficult to find and easy to slip out of. Now, let's examine what happened during the interrogations and trials of accused solitary women. According to legal procedures, once accused, a woman faced a system designed to extract confessions. The evidence against her, according to what counted as proof, included gossip, speculation, and the testimony of people who might have their own reasons for wanting her condemned. Meet Anna Gieseberwind, one of the last people executed for witchcraft in Europe, killed in Switzerland in 1782. According to her case, she was a maidservant who had an affair with her employer. When the affair was discovered, according to the sequence, the employer's daughter began experiencing fits and claimed to be finding needles in her food. Anna, according to the accusation, was blamed for bewitching the girl. She was, according to her vulnerable position, a servant without family protection. She had, according to the moral judgment, engaged in sexual misconduct. She was, according to her status, alone and defendable. Under torture, according to the procedure, Anna confessed to putting needles in the girl's food through witchcraft. The confession, according to its reliability, was obviously false, extracted through the pain and terror of torture. But according to the legal standards, a confession was the queen of proofs. Once you confessed, according to the system, your guilt was established. Anna was executed, according to the sentence, by being beheaded rather than burned, a small mercy indicating some doubt about her guilt, but not enough to save her life. The torture methods used to extract confessions, according to historical documentation, were horrific. According to the procedures, accused women were subjected to thumbscrews that crushed their thumbs, strappado that dislocated their shoulders, leg vices that shattered their legs, and prolonged sleep deprivation that caused hallucinations. Under such treatment, according to the predictable outcome, most people would confess to anything to make it stop. The confession, according to the circular logic, then proved the accusation had been correct. According to trial records, certain questions were asked repeatedly. Have you made a pact with the devil? According to the interrogation, in what form did he appear to you? According to the assumption that of course he had appeared, what sexual acts did you perform with him? According to the graphic nature of the questioning, who else was at the Sabbath? According to the pressure to implicate others, the questions, according to their framing, presumed guilt and required the accused to provide details of crimes they hadn't committed. For women living alone, according to additional vulnerability, there was another danger. They had no family members who might pay bribes to officials for better treatment or quicker death. They had, according to their isolation, no one to bring them food or clean clothes in prison. They suffered, according to their abandonment, alone in dungeons that were cold, filthy, and disease-ridden. Some women, according to mercy of a sort, died in prison before they could be executed. Death from disease or exposure rather than from deliberate execution. Meet the Wurzburg witch trials in Germany, which from 1626 to 1631 killed at least 900 people. According to the records, a special prison was built to house the accused. The conditions, according to descriptions, were deliberately harsh. Prisoners were kept in darkness, given minimal food, subjected to extreme cold in winter and extreme heat in summer. The suffering, according to its purpose, was meant to break their will and make them confess. Many of the accused, according to the pattern, were solitary women, widows, unmarried women, servants living away from families. The trials, according to their scope, fed on themselves. Each person tortured into confession, according to the procedure, was asked to name accomplices. The names they gave, according to desperate attempts to stop pain, led to more arrests. The cycle, according to its horror, continued until the trials finally ended, not because authorities realized the injustice, but because so many people had been killed that the social and economic disruption became untenable. Think about being arrested as a solitary woman, According to your situation, you have no husband to speak for you, no adult sons to protect you, no father or brothers to intervene. Your accusers, according to their testimony, describe suspicious behavior that is really just normal activities reinterpreted. Your neighbors, according to their fear of being accused themselves, don't defend you. Association with an accused witch, according to the danger, might bring suspicion on them. You are alone, according to the terrible reality, facing a legal system that presumes your guilt and uses torture to prove it. Now, let's explore the few women who survived accusations and what their survival required. According to rare cases of acquittal or escape, certain factors could save an accused woman. Having powerful connections, according to one protective factor, could help. Being wealthy enough to afford good legal representation, according to another factor, might save you. Sometimes, according to divine intervention or luck, the political situation would shift and trials would end before your case was completed. Meet Jane Wenham, tried for witchcraft in England in 1712. According to her case, she was an elderly woman living alone who was accused of bewitching people and cattle. She was found guilty according to the verdict and sentenced to death. But according to an unusual outcome, she received a pardon from Queen Anne. Her reprieve, according to historical analysis, came partly because the trial happened late in the period of witch prosecutions, when skepticism about such accusations was growing, and partly because some influential people spoke on her behalf. She lived, according to her life after the trial, for another 20 years under the protection of a sympathetic family. Her survival, according to its exceptional nature, highlights how rare it was to escape execution once convicted. Most women, according to the typical outcome, were not so fortunate. They didn't have influential defenders. They lived in times and places where belief in witchcraft was strong. They died, according to the statistics, in the thousands across Europe and European colonies. According to the overall death toll, estimates suggest between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft during the early modern period in Europe, with potentially another 50,000 to 100,000 killed in regions outside Europe. Women, according to the gender breakdown, made up about 75 to 80% of the victims. And among those women, according to the demographic analysis, solitary women, widows, unmarried women, women without male protection, were vastly overrepresented. The persecution of solitary women, according to geographic patterns, varied by region. In some areas, according to local intensity, witch hunts were particularly severe. The Holy Roman Empire, according to execution statistics, was responsible for about half of all witch executions in Europe. Scotland, according to its zealous prosecution, had particularly intense witch hunts relative to its population. The American colonies, according to Salem and other trials, imported European witch beliefs and persecution practices. But according to the common thread across regions, solitary women were vulnerable everywhere. The specific accusations, according to local variation, might differ. In some places, witches were said to cause storms, in others to blight crops, in still others to kill children. The theological details, according to Catholic versus Protestant differences, varied. But according to the consistent pattern, women living independently were suspected and persecuted across the Christian world. Meet Maria de Zozaya, tried by the Spanish Inquisition in the 1600s. According to her case, she was a healer who lived alone in a Basque village. She was accused, according to the charges, of using magic to cure illnesses. The Inquisition, according to its approach to witchcraft, was actually somewhat less likely to execute accused witches than secular courts. The Inquisition often viewed witchcraft beliefs as superstitious. But according to Maria's vulnerable position as a solitary healer, she still faced prosecution. She was, according to the outcome, subjected to years of investigation before being released with a warning. Her case, according to what it reveals, shows that even where authorities were skeptical about witchcraft, solitary women practicing healing or folk magic faced danger. The line, according to its ambiguity, between acceptable folk practice and unacceptable witchcraft was never clear. What was tolerated one year, according to changing winds, might be prosecuted the next. A woman who had lived quietly for decades, according to the potential for sudden danger, could suddenly find herself accused when circumstances change. Now, let's examine how the persecution of solitary women varied by social class. According to class analysis, poor women faced the highest risk of accusation, but even wealthy women weren't entirely safe if they lived too independently. Meet Alice Kitteler, one of the first people accused of witchcraft in Ireland, tried in 1324. According to her circumstances, she was a wealthy woman who had been widowed multiple times. She was, according to her business acumen, successful at managing and increasing her inherited wealth. She lived, according to her household, with servants and her son, but without a husband after her fourth husband's death. Her adult children from previous marriages, according to the accusation, claimed she had used witchcraft to poison their fathers and steal their inheritances. The case, according to its dynamics, shows how wealth didn't automatically protect a woman if she was too independent. Alice's repeated widowhood, according to suspicious interpretation, suggested she might be killing her husbands. Her business success, according to the unnatural quality, indicated possible supernatural help. Her independence, according to the threat, challenged her stepchildren's expectations about inheritance. She was, according to the charges, accused of having a demonic familiar and practicing harmful magic. Alice, according to her wealth and connections, was able to escape. She fled, according to her rescue, to England and was never captured, but according to the fate of others accused with her, her maidservant Petronella de Meath was flogged, tortured and burned alive as a witch. Petronella's death, according to its function, satisfied the need for punishment, while Alice herself escaped. The wealthy woman, according to the outcome, survived through flight while the poor woman burned. The pattern, according to class dynamics, shows that wealth could sometimes buy escape, but didn't prevent accusation. A wealthy widow living independently, according to the suspicion, might attract accusations motivated by envy or desire for her property. A poor woman living alone, according to the opposite vulnerability, might attract accusations because she was a burden on community resources or a convenient scapegoat. Either way, according to the common factor, independent living as a woman was dangerous. According to another dimension of class, women from the nobility faced different but real dangers if they lived too independently. A noble woman, according to her status, had more protection than a peasant. But according to political dynamics, she could be vulnerable if her independence threatened the wrong people. Meet Eleanor Cobham, Duchess of Gloucester, accused of witchcraft in England in 1441. According to her position, she was married to the Duke of Gloucester, who was heir presumptive to the English throne. She was accused, according to the charges, of using witchcraft to predict the king's death and to try to ensure her husband would become king. She was, according to the evidence, said to have consulted with astrologers and magicians. The case, according to political analysis, was likely motivated by political enemies who wanted to discredit the Duke. But according to the accusations, they focused on Eleanor's activities and independence. She was portrayed, according to the characterization, as a woman who exceeded her proper role, who sought power inappropriately, who used supernatural means to achieve unnatural ends. She was forced, according to the punishment, to do public penance walking through London streets carrying a candle, then imprisoned for life. Her husband's political position, according to the damage, was destroyed. Eleanor's case, according to what it demonstrates, shows that even at the highest social levels, a woman perceived as too independent or too ambitious could be brought down through accusations of witchcraft. The specific form, according to the variation, might differ from peasant witch trials. Eleanor wasn't tortured or executed. Her trial was a political spectacle rather than a local persecution. But, according to the underlying pattern, female independence and ambition were suspect and could be attacked through supernatural accusations. Now let's explore how the witch persecution finally declined and what caused the change. According to historical timeline, witch trials peaked in the late 1500s through mid-1600s, then gradually decreased in the late 1600s and 1700s. The decline, according to multiple factors, came from changing intellectual climate, legal reforms, and growing skepticism about witchcraft accusations. According to the Enlightenment's influence, intellectual leaders began questioning supernatural explanations and demanding better evidence for extraordinary claims. Scientists, according to the new methodology, explained natural phenomena through natural causes rather than divine or demonic intervention. Philosophers, according to rational inquiry, questioned whether the devil could really give humans magical powers. Legal reformers, according to their advocacy, argued that witch trials were based on unreliable evidence and coerced confessions. Meet Friedrich Spee, a German Jesuit priest who served as confessor to women condemned for witchcraft. According to his experience listening to their final confessions, he became convinced that most of the accused women were innocent. He wrote, according to his published work in 1631, Cortio Criminalis, Precautions for Prosecutors, arguing that witch trials were unjust and that the procedures used to convict witches would convict anyone subjected to them. His book, according to its influence, helped turn educated opinion against witch prosecutions. According to legal changes, various jurisdictions began requiring higher standards of proof, limiting the use of torture and allowing defense attorneys for the accused. These reforms, according to their effect, made convictions more difficult. Without torture, according to the practical reality, far fewer people confessed. With better legal representation, according to the advocacy, accused women could challenge the evidence against them. With higher proof standards, according to the courts, mere suspicion and neighborhood gossip weren't enough to convict. But according to the gradual nature of change, the persecution didn't end quickly or completely. According to persistence in some areas, witch trials continued into the 18th century in some regions. The last legal execution for witchcraft in Europe, according to historical records, was Anna Gildi in Switzerland in 1782. Informal persecution, according to mob violence, continued even longer in some places. Women living alone, according to the lingering stigma, faced suspicion and marginalization long after legal witch trials ended. According to modern analysis, the witch hunts ended not primarily because people stopped believing in witches, but because the legal and intellectual framework supporting prosecution collapsed. Many people, according to folk belief, continued to believe in witchcraft, but according to the change, authorities were no longer willing to prosecute and execute based on such beliefs. The state, according to the monopoly on violence, stopped authorizing witch executions even if popular belief in witches continued. Think about what this means. According to the lesson, the persecution of solitary women ended not because people suddenly recognized women's right to independence, but because the mechanism of legal persecution became discredited. Folk suspicion, according to the persistence, remained. Women living alone, according to continuing stigma, still faced gossip and marginalization. But according to the crucial change, they were no longer legally executed for it. Now, let's consider the long-term psychological and social impacts of centuries of persecution. According to the cultural memory, the witch hunts left deep marks on how female independence was perceived. The association between solitary women and evil, according to its persistence, echoed through folklore, literature, and social attitudes for centuries after the trials ended. Meet the fairy tale tradition's depiction of witches. According to stories like Hansel and Gretel, the witch is an old woman living alone in the forest. According to Snow White, the evil queen uses magic and lives without a king after his death. According to Rapunzel, the witch is a solitary woman who locks a girl in a tower. These stories, according to their circulation, reinforced the idea that women living alone were dangerous, evil, and to be feared. The tales, according to their messages, taught children that independent women were threats. The happy endings, according to their content, came when the witch was defeated or killed, and normal family order was restored. The stories, according to their function, transmitted across generations the idea that female independence was unnatural and associated with evil, even though legal witch trials had ended, according to the cultural persistence. The stigmatization of solitary women continued through stories and social attitudes. According to literature from the 18th and 19th centuries, the old maid or spinster became stock figures of ridicule and pity. These women, according to their portrayal, were portrayed as dried up, bitter, unfeminine creatures who had failed at women's proper role of marriage and motherhood. They lived alone, according to the depictions, in shabby genteel poverty, obsessing over cats and gossip. The characterization, according to its cruelty, mocked women who didn't marry while simultaneously making clear that such women were to be pitied and scorned. Meet the stereotype of the spinster as it developed in Victorian England. According to this caricature, she was thin and pinched, dressed in outdated clothes, living in a house full of cats, bitter about her unmarried state and interfering in other people's business. She was, according to the characterization, an object of comedy and contempt. The spinster, according to cultural function, served as a warning to young women. This is what happens if you don't marry. This is what a woman alone becomes ridiculous, pathetic, and useless. The continuity, according to historical analysis, between the witch and the spinster is striking. Both, according to the common elements, are women living alone. Both, according to the depiction, are associated with cats. Both, according to the portrayal, are outside normal family structures. Both, according to the message, represent failed femininity. The witch, according to the terrifying version, is dangerous and must be destroyed. The spinster, according to the contemptuous version, is ridiculous and must be mocked. Either way, according to the underlying theme, female solitary living is abnormal and bad. According to the persistence into the 20th century, single women continue to face stigma and practical discrimination. According to employment practices, many jobs were closed to married women on the theory that they should be home with families. But single women were also discriminated against as somehow failed or incomplete. According to housing, landladies often refused to rent to single women. According to social life, a woman alone at a restaurant or theatre was assumed to be a prostitute or woman of loose morals. Meet the spinster laws and bachelor taxes that existed in various jurisdictions into the modern era. According to these legal restrictions, single women faced financial penalties or legal restrictions for remaining unmarried. In some places, according to property laws, unmarried women had restricted rights to own or inherit property. In others, according to employment regulations, certain jobs or professions were closed to unmarried women. The echo, according to the connection of the idea that women living independently were dangerous or unnatural, persisted in law long after witch trials ended. According to the World War's impact, massive social changes began to shift attitudes towards solitary women. When men went to war, according to necessity, women filled traditionally male roles and proved their capability. Women lived, according to wartime reality, independently while men were away. They worked, according to economic contribution, in factories, offices, and fields. They managed, according to their competence, businesses and households without male oversight. The fiction, according to its exposure, that women needed constant male supervision was harder to maintain after the wars. But according to the post-war backlash, many societies attempted to push women back into traditional roles. The independent woman who had worked during the war, according to social pressure, was expected to give up her job to returning men and retreat to domestic life. Women who resisted, according to the stigma, were portrayed as selfish, unwomanly, or damaging to men who needed those jobs. The language, according to its evolution, had changed from witch to unfeminine or unnatural, but the underlying message remained. Female independence was wrong. According to the feminist movements of the 20th century, deliberate efforts were made to challenge the stigma against women living independently. Feminists, according to their activism, fought for women's right to own property. to work, to live alone, to remain unmarried without social penalty. They argued, according to their position, that female independence was natural and healthy, not deviant or dangerous. They connected, according to historical analysis, the persecution of independent women throughout history to the ongoing stigmatization of single women in modern times. According to the persistence of stereotypes in popular culture, the negative portrayal of solitary women continued well into the late 20th century. In films and television, according to the depictions, single women were often portrayed as bitter career women, lonely cat ladies, desperate spinsters, or dangerous femme fatales. The sympathetic portrayal, according to its rarity, of a woman happily living independently was uncommon. The assumption, according to media messages, remained that a woman without a man must be either unhappy or threatening. Think about modern romantic comedies according to the formula, where the heroine's story arc almost always ends with her finding a man. A woman living happily alone, according to the narrative structure, is portrayed as incomplete. Her independence, according to the implication, is a temporary state to be resolved through coupling. The echo, according to this continuation of the historical message that women shouldn't live alone, persists in modern storytelling. According to contemporary housing discrimination, single women still face challenges. Landlords, according to documented cases, sometimes prefer to rent to couples or families rather than single women. Single women, according to mortgage statistics, often face more scrutiny when buying homes than single men or couples. The assumptions, according to their persistence, include ideas that single women are unstable, unreliable, or likely to cause problems. Echoes of the old suspicions about solitary women. According to workplace dynamics, women who prioritize careers over marriage and family still face judgment. The successful woman without a husband, according to common speculation, must be married to her job or must have sacrificed her personal life. The assumption, according to its persistence, is that female independence comes at a cost, that a woman can't be both independent and happy. The framing, according to its historical roots, echoes the old idea that women living without men are unnatural. According to online harassment of independent women, modern technology has created new ways to punish female autonomy. Women who speak publicly, live independently, or challenge traditional gender roles, according to documented patterns, receive disproportionate online hate threats and harassment. The accusations, according to their content, often include calling such women unnatural, deviant, or dangerous. The which, according to the modern parallel, has become the feminazi, or other slurs designed to delegitimize independent women. According to the persistence of suspicious attitudes toward older single women, society still views them with discomfort. The older woman living alone, according to stereotypes, is lonely, sad, a burden on social services, or a cautionary tale. Media portrayals, according to their frequency, show elderly women living alone as objects of pity or fear. The positive portrayals, according to their scarcity, of older women thriving independently are far outnumbered by negative depictions. The continuity, according to historical analysis, with the witch trials targeting of elderly solitary women is striking. The message, according to its consistency across centuries, was clear: women should not live alone. The specific justification, according to changing times, shifted from "she is probably a witch" to "she is probably immoral" to "she is probably immoral" to "she is probably pathetic." But, according to the constant theme, independent female living was stigmatized and discouraged. According to the celebration and reclamation of witch identity by modern feminists, some women have deliberately embraced the label that was once used to kill their predecessors. The modern witch, according to this reclamation, is a symbol of female power, independence, and resistance to patriarchal control. Feminist witch covens, according to their formation, create communities of women who celebrate autonomy and reject traditional gender roles. The witch, according to this transformation, has shifted from a figure of terror to a figure of empowerment. But, according to the cautions some historians express, this reclamation must be balanced with remembering the real women who were tortured and killed. The modern witch aesthetic, according to its popularity, sometimes romanticizes what was actually horrific persecution. The thousands of real women, according to the reminder, who burned or hanged as witches did not choose that identity. It was forced upon them as justification for murder. The reclamation, according to its meaning, should honor their suffering while celebrating modern women's freedom to live independently without fear of execution. Now, as we approach the end of our journey, let's consider what modern women owe to the solitary women who were persecuted as witches. According to the debt we have, those women paid in torture and fire for living independently. Their persecution, according to its function, enforced the message that female autonomy was dangerous and would be punished. But according to the paradox, their very existence, women who lived alone despite the danger, proved that female independence was possible. According to modern rights that we take for granted, women can now live alone without being accused of witchcraft. We can own property according to legal rights without needing male guardians. We can run businesses according to economic freedom without being suspected of demonic assistance. We can choose not to marry according to reproductive freedom without being labeled as devil's servants. These rights, according to their history, were not given freely. They were won through centuries of struggle, and part of that struggle, according to its earliest phase, was simply surviving as an independent woman when doing so could get you killed. Think about a woman like Agnes, whom we met at the beginning, living alone in 1612 England, supporting herself through her spinning and midwifery, growing more suspicious and isolated as neighbours turned against her. According to her courage, simply continuing to live alone despite the danger was an act of resistance. Simply surviving, according to the victory, was winning against a system designed to eliminate women like her. Or think about Marjorie, the German widow who learned shoemaking to support herself, who was arrested and likely died because her independence and skill seemed unnatural. According to her determination, she chose difficult independence over easier dependence. She chose to use her skills and support herself rather than remarrying or becoming a dependent in someone else's household. That choice, according to its cost, may have cost her life. But according to its meaning, it asserted that women could be capable and independent. Every woman who lived alone despite the danger, according to the collective impact, helped prove that female independence was survivable. Every woman who owned property, who ran a business, who supported herself, who chose not to marry, according to her existence, challenged the ideology that women needed and should want male control. The witchcraft persecutions, according to their brutal purpose, were meant to terrorize women into compliance and dependence. But according to the failure of that purpose, women kept living independently anyway, fewer of them, according to the deterrent effect, than might have otherwise. More afraid according to the climate of fear than they should have been, but still, according to the persistence, they existed. Tonight, according to my hope, as you drift off to sleep, I want you to remember these women. Remember Agnes, growing vegetables in her garden alone, watching neighbours cross themselves when she walked by. Remember Marjorie, arrested for witchcraft after making shoes without a husband's permission. Remember Anna Geldy, one of the last to be executed, killed for the crime of being a maidservant without protection. Remember Bridget Bishop, owning property and running taverns, hanged because independent prosperity in a woman seemed impossible without the devil's help. Remember the thousands upon thousands of women whose names we don't know, who were accused, tortured, and killed for living alone, for being too independent, for having knowledge or property, for refusing to submit to male control. Remember that their persecution, according to its purpose, was not about protecting communities from evil. It was, according to its function, about enforcing control over women and punishing those who stepped outside prescribed roles. Remember them according to what we owe them, with sorrow for their suffering and admiration for their courage. They lived according to their strength. In times when female independence could be a death sentence, they lived alone according to their choice or circumstance anyway. Some survived according to their luck or resources. Most, according to the tragedy, did not. But all of them, according to their legacy, helped pave the way for the rights and freedoms women have today. Remember the healer who was burned because her remedies threatened male physicians' monopoly on medical knowledge. Remember the widow who was hanged because her property was wanted by male relatives. Remember the unmarried woman who was tortured because her independence made neighbors uncomfortable. Remember the midwife who was drowned because a difficult birth ended in death and someone needed to blame. Remember the herbalist who was strangled because her garden grew too well. Remember the businesswoman who was burned because her success seemed impossible without demonic help. Remember that each of these women, according to her individual story, was a real person with hopes, fears, skills, and relationships. She wasn't, according to the reality, a witch or a demon. She was, according to the truth, a woman trying to live her life, often in difficult circumstances, often alone by necessity rather than choice. Her crime, according to the charges, was witchcraft, but her real crime, according to the underlying motivation, was being a woman without adequate male control in a society that couldn't tolerate female independence. According to the numbers, tens of thousands of women were executed. According to the broader impact, hundreds of thousands more lived in fear, modified their behavior to avoid suspicion, or were forced into marriages and dependencies they might not have chosen if the alternative weren't so dangerous. The witch hunts, according to their function, were terrorism, state-sanctioned violence, designed to control an entire category of people through fear. And they worked according to their effect for centuries. But according to the ultimate failure, they didn't eliminate female independence. Women kept, according to the persistence, finding ways to survive alone. They kept, according to their courage, exercising whatever autonomy they could. They kept, according to their resistance, passing down knowledge and skills despite the dangers. And slowly, according to the progress of centuries, the space for female independence expanded. Not because it was granted according to the history, but because women kept claiming it despite the cost. May we, according to the lesson, never forget that the right to live independently as a woman was won at tremendous cost. May we, according to the honor we owe, value and protect the autonomy that women before us died for. May we, according to the vigilance needed, recognize when modern systems still try to punish or control female independence through different means. May we, according to the solidarity required, support women who choose to live independently and challenge anyone who suggests there is something wrong or unnatural about women living alone. Sweet dreams, and may you wake tomorrow with deep gratitude for the freedom to live alone if you choose, with awareness of the price paid for that freedom, with compassion for the women who were tortured and killed for the crime of independence, and with determination to honor their memory by defending women's autonomy. May you remember that female independence, according to what it represents, was never evil or unnatural. It was, according to the truth, simply threatening to systems of male control, and those systems, according to their desperation, called independent women demons and witches and burned them alive. May you sleep, according to your safety, secure in the knowledge that you won't be dragged from your bed and accused of witchcraft for living as you choose. May you wake, according to your freedom, ready to use the independence that women before you paid for with their lives. And may you never, according to the promise we should make, let anyone convince you that female autonomy is unnatural, wrong, or evil. Thank you for spending this night with me, learning about the women who were called demons for the crime of living alone. Thank you for bearing witness to their persecution, and for understanding that the witch hunts were not about stopping evil, but about controlling women. Thank you for honoring their memory, and for carrying forward the struggle for women's freedom and autonomy. Sleep well, and may you dream of a world where no woman is ever punished for choosing independence, where solitary living is respected rather than stigmatized, and where all women are free to live as they choose without fear. Good night, and may your rest be peaceful, and your morning bright with the freedom they died to help create.